Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode, I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film would become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. Hello, podsters or podroonies, if you prefer. We are back talking Superman films for part 2 of the podcast. I've got Andrew Corns with me from the Revisionist Almanac podcast.
I'm not going to make it easy on you, Martin.
Is still with me. And of course, this is the part of the show where we take a look at your Instagram responses from the previous episode. The Meandering Movie Podcast went with Creed, a great comedy podcast from Scotland. Heather J. Stewart has said, off the top of my head, possibly Rogue One, Star Wars Rogue One. And Anton Kinlove went with Rogue One as well. So just a few responses for this episode. Andrew, I'm intrigued. What spin-off film did you go for?
I went with The Scorpion King.
The Scorpion King?
No. It's the second time I've tried to get you to break. Yeah. I assumed if I could. No, I did see The Scorpion King in theaters when it came out. I have to sheepishly admit that, but that's for another time, another place, another bad movie podcast. I'm going to go with Rogue One. Yeah. Rogue One is just, maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. I think Rogue One is like a top 3 Star Wars movie for me. I love it.
Ooh, wow. I mean, when we were talking about it last episode with Lee from Lights Camera, and always a lot of fun with that guy. But we had both seen Andor, the TV show, and it makes certainly the Andor character a lot better. There's so much more depth to him going into this film. Less so for Jinna, so a little bit you're like, why are you in this film, Jin? Go away.
You've seen I haven't listened to that episode yet because I was going to wait until after. Have you seen the entirety of Andor at this point?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, I have as well.
Yes, a magnificent show for me.
Phenomenal.
Really is. So certainly going back to Rogue One, it makes parts of Rogue One better and some parts not so good.
Yes.
I think one particular... I mean, have you watched it since watching Andor yourself?
I haven't, and I do need to do that to see how it changes my perception of it.
Yeah. I don't know if you follow the Empire podcast, but they've done a retrospective, spoiler special for that film after they've watched Andor. That's a good podcast to listen to as well. A lot of interesting opinions on that. Yeah, I think Mon Mothma, like her betrayal, doesn't feel as consistent with the show, but certainly Cassian Andor is great going into the movie after watching the TV show.
I know I made a post on May the 4th with my Star Wars rankings on social media, and I got a lot of feedback, positive and definitely negative, about my Rogue One placement.
Yeah, I mean, when I did Mission Impossible ranking of those films, I certainly got some feedback too. But we are talking Superman films, and it is my turn now, people. This was, unlike last week, where it was very easy for me to choose my spin-off film, going with Rogue One, very easy. This, a lot more difficult. I didn't want to go for another Christopher Reeve film, especially as there's been, different versions post, so I thought it wouldn't be right. And also, there was certainly one Christopher Reeve film I definitely was not going to go with, and that was Superman 3, because it's terrifying. Especially the end, where that poor woman gets sucked into the supercomputer and gets turned into a cyborg. That is terrifying. I watched that far too young. I had nightmares for days. So if you do show the Christopher Reeve films to your kids, just warn them about Superman 3.
Yeah. We'll stay on the first one for a while.
Yeah. So it was definitely between the 2006 Superman Returns, because I had a lot of fond memories with that. I not only because of the film, because I took a girl on a date with that, and I didn't actually see much of the film, obviously. But when I rewatched it on DVD, I really enjoyed it. There's some really interesting, apart from the suit, which I've already talked about in part one, which is absolutely dreadful. But I have nothing against Brandon Routh. I think he's a perfectly fine Superman and Clark Kent. You know, Bryan Singer certainly was still going for the traditional Christopher Reeve vibes. It was still kind of perceived as a continuation of the Christopher Reeve Superman stories. There's some really interesting, really great action in that for me. But ultimately, I went with Man of Steel, mainly because when I first watched this, I wasn't a huge fan of the film. They go in a very different direction with Superman. And unlike we've talked about with James Gunn, where he is extremely good at taking comic books and just adapting them straight to screen in a very confident way with no messing about with the imagery. Zack Snyder, on the other hand, he's a great visual storyteller, really great director, not so good writer. If he hasn't written it, but he's directed it, I'm here for it. But if he's penning it as well, I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not so sure.
the Watchmen translation from comic to screen wasn't perfectly written.
No, yeah, that's certainly one that I come back to. To be fair, that's I don't mind that one, but I think with Zack Snyder with Man of Steel, he brings a tone to this film where, and always kind of is asking this question of, what if Superman was real? What if Superman was in the real world? Like, how would Krypton as a species and as a world, how would that relate to Earth and everything that's kind of, and how these two worlds collide? What would that look like? So there's no ice, Fortress of Solitude here. It's a scout ship from Krypton trying to look for an inhabitable worlds, So with every aspect of this film, for me, for Zack Snyder, is that he's always asking the question, how do we make this feel real? How do we make this feel natural from a human perspective? And I think for the most part, he does a stand-up job. I think initially when I watched it, I had a problem with the editing. The flashbacks were too on the nose, and do we need all these flashbacks? But I think watching it again for this podcast, I think they work a lot better, the storytelling with this flashbacks. And obviously Henry Cavill is a great actor, even though it's a very different take on Clark Kent and Superman. It's still a great performance for me. So what happens in Man of Steel? Well, it's basically the same as Superman 2. But I'm going to IMDb, and it states an alien child is evacuated from his dying world and sent to Earth to live among humans. His peace is threatened when other survivors of his home planet invade Earth. So yeah, pretty much the same story. So initial reactions for you, Andrew, for Man of Steel. What did you make of it?
Well, I must say, with great power comes great responsibility. This is the first podcast I've done where the Snyder people online are probably scrutinizing what I'm about to say, so I will tread the line. I am neither a Snyder hater nor a Snyder worshiper, which I know I don't feel like there are many people in the middle. That you're on one camp or the other, and I'm kind of in the middle. I think he can do some stuff really well, and I also think sometimes his tendencies get him in trouble. And this movie's kind of a perfect encapsulation of the best and the worst of Zack Snyder. I'll kind of leave it at that for the moment. I saw the movie when it came out. I really enjoyed it. It obviously got a lot of polarization since. I contend that this is a great Superman movie. I think it gets a lot more right than it gets wrong. I don't love aspects of it, but there's enough in it that it's not far off 1978's original for me as my favorite version of Superman. That's and that might be a hot take, but I'm kind of in there with it. I enjoy this movie a lot.
Yeah, I think, certainly on this rewatch, I enjoyed it a lot more than the first time. I guess, a bit like you. I'm a bit in the middle with Zack Snyder. Like, a lot of the stuff post this film, I haven't really enjoyed. I didn't like Batman vs Superman much. Even his Justice League, far too long. I know there was a grand plan with all that, 3 other movies to come out, but I wasn't a huge fan of that. Army of the Dead, or the zombie heist film, dreadful. Really didn't like that at all.
So bad.
Yeah, we've covered that on this podcast, actually. So you can hear my more detailed frustrations about that movie in our heist films episode. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of things like 300 and Watchmen and things like that. So it's definitely a good. And I haven't been really bothered with his kind of quasi Star Wars movies. I kind of Rebel Moon. I haven't really watched those. It seems to be kind of an attitude with Zack Snyder now that he'll just release a theatrical cut, but there'll be his cut. His cut will be available at some point, and I'm just well, can we just have what your version would be from the start in your original cut?
He and
You're
Ridley
never going to be fired.
Yes.
You're not going to be fired like Richard Donner.
It blows me away that he and Ridley Scott both do this, where they're we'll give you the theatrical, but you better believe I have a really long extended cut coming out. And I'm just give me one, please, because I always say I'm a compulsive completionist. I will watch everything, and I'm going to get stuck watching both damn versions of everything you put out. So please don't.
We've got so much to watch, people. Come on.
You're better off not going near Rebel Moon. They're good for naps. they look great, but there is nothing underneath them.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So let's get into it then. So directing then, the opening scene on Krypton, I think is great. You get thrown into this beautiful action-packed situation straight away, which starts with the birth of Superman, and then it goes pretty non-stop from then. Michael Shannon as General Zod is very angry at everyone. Russell Crowe as Jor-El jumps on a giant dragonfly and flies around for a bit, then goes for a swim. They have a big fight, and ships are blowing up left, right, and center. So there's not a lot of I would say, world building. Just you're kind of thrown into quite a grand and beautiful alien planet. So there is some kind of really interesting kind of zoom type shots on ships and dragonflies to give you some sort of scale perspective. And there's some amazing silhouette shots of ships against this giant sun, you would see in some war films. So it's great visually. It's a great visual feast that I think Zack Snyder is brilliant at, and definitely a strength of the film as you watch on.
Yeah, the opening, I think it clocks in about 19 minutes where they're on Krypton before we ever get to Earth. And it's a lot, but I don't mind it. It could maybe be condensed a teeny little bit in the dragonfly flying scene. I'm okay, that's just kind of there, whatever. It's not exposition dump heavy. There are points in this movie where there's some exposition dumps where I'm you need to work on your writing, my man. But in terms of the opening, I actually think it establishes relatively well the stakes, and I think Zod immediately comes off as an intimidating villain, and I think Russell Crowe's the right choice for Jor-El to give this sort of gravitas to that character. I like the choice there, and I think it gets across what it needs to. It's the next hour where this movie becomes 100% for me what I love. The next hour after we get off Krypton up until the final battle is where I can go back to this movie time and time again. I think that's maybe Zack Snyder's best hour of direction he's ever put on film. Once we get to the world and once we start seeing Clark, and the flashbacks to me work really well on revisit.
Yeah, they did for me. what I like about the opening scene as well is that, yes, you're very much thrown into it, but you get a lot of like the storytelling, and you get a lot of like who these characters are through the designs and the costumes. Like, you know, with Zod and his gang, like the costumes are really very grand and dark, and you immediately understand that these are the bad guys and not to be messed with, even if you have no like knowledge about these Superman characters on Krypton. You're like, yeah, Michael Shannon's the bad guy.
Yes.
The film has a very naturalistic look, like with this kind of, when we get back onto Earth, you know, with the unsaturated colors and a lot of handheld cameras, you know, and that attitude kind of extends to the action scenes as well. And I loved Superman's first fight. Like you get the now classic first flight, sorry. You get now the classic like close up on his face while he's flying. But I love how like the camera is just like trying to capture him flying in a way from a distance because he's going so fast. Like I love the inclusion of Superman like breaking the sound barrier, because that would happen if something that fast, you know, that's what would happen if it was going that fast. So I love this commitment from Zack Snyder to always ask the question, like, what if Superman was real? You know, what would happen? You know, the only thing that didn't work for me was a bit where Superman crashes through a mountain. That was a little bit too funny for me, you know, with the tone that they were going for.
Yeah, and to kind of build on just the way I think Snyder does a really good job of letting you know that this is an alien in a human environment is when we get the flashbacks to Clark when he's like a school-age child, and he's sort of getting this sensory overload, and you're seeing the world through him, and he can see into like his teacher's body, and it's just like it's really jarring to put yourselves in the shoes and to be. I can imagine how hard it must have been for a young Clark Kent to adapt to life on Earth, and I think Snyder does a really good job of letting you empathize with this character and his struggle, and also gives Zack Snyder a whole lot of credit for. He knew how to make Henry Cavill's abs and body look really, really good. Credit to Cavill for putting in the work. He didn't take the easy way out and take any steroids. He went there and put in the muscle. But like right away, you get that early scene when he's on the boat and then he goes and saves this giant oil rig that's on fire, and he's like holding this thing up, and you get like the perfect Henry Cavill physique. And I'm like, you know, Zack Snyder captures the male figure very well. So good for him for that.
And Kryptonian chest hair is a thing. Those hairs don't burn off. They don't.
I didn't think about the chest hair also being superpowered stuck to him. That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think by and large, Zack Snyder gets a lot right with that middle portion. And I think that casting Diane Lane and Kevin Costner as Jonathan and Martha was
genius.
Casting genius. I mean, those two perfectly fit the tone of like a Midwestern parental unit. I'm from the Midwest, so I see a lot of parents like that. They feel very natural, and I think it really set the tone well for empathizing with Clark in that moment.
Yeah, and I think it's just great seeing his X-ray vision superpowers as well, because you don't I feel like that's a power of Superman that gets left behind in a lot of films. You don't often see that, so it's just great to actually just work that in, even though he never really uses it in a helpful way for him. But it's great to see, though, you know, so I think it gets forgotten about.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I love about what Snyder does specifically with the way he directs this movie is when Zod finally comes to Earth, the movie takes a fundamental tone shift in that like few minutes that Zod's coming. I almost equate it to, it feels like a horror movie for a couple of minutes where like you're genuinely concerned about what's happening. And it sort of feels like a throwback to like a 1980s like Alien film where power cuts out and you're not really sure what's going on. And so I got to give Zack Snyder a lot of credit for the way he introduces Zod to Earth is really impressive. Like, again, it changes the tone of the movie for about 2 or 3 minutes to, it feels like a horror film, and then it switches back. But like he pulls that off very well. So for as much as people like to rag on Zack Snyder for not being a great director, I think he does know how to use tonal shifts in a really good way in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. I got a lot of like sort of Poltergeist vibes and sort of The Ring as well with sort of the broadcast that he does on everyone's TV. All the lights go out. That's So certainly that tonal shift was very effective for me. There's another one that I'll come to, which is very interesting. I was very much here for it. I don't know whether it kind of fits that well, but yeah. But I mean, it makes General Zod scary. It gives him that extra kind of dark villain character that you don't often. I mean, there's no camp here at all. As much as I love Terrence Stamp, then there's none of that here from Michael Shannon.
Yeah, very little in the way of funny lines in this movie. I mean,
no.
There's maybe one or two sprinkled in here, but it's definitely got a whole different tone to it. And I was sort of taken back by I was like, man, we are in just a different time. This movie comes out in the same period as like Avengers, Dark Knight Rises, Iron Man 3, The Wolverine. Like all of these superhero movies were going for the same sort of aesthetic, the same sort of tone. I kind of wish this movie had just a touch of levity every now and then to kind of break up the darkness and the sort of the grayness of the movie. But I also understand that Zack Snyder was trying to make a movie that was fitting everything else that was coming out in that time period that was very financially successful. So I can understand it, but I think by and large he gets a lot of this movie right.
Yeah, I think certainly this film comes out in I guess some people are calling it the Nolanization of films, big blockbuster films where everything's ultra serious, and again, like, what would happen if these things were real? And obviously Christopher Nolan was a writer on this film and had a lot of input. Some of his advice was ignored, and we'll certainly get into that in screenplay. But another kind of thing that was kind of happening in Hollywood at this time was this ultra mass destruction of big cities. Another one that came out similar time was Star Trek Into Darkness. Was another one where you had mass cities being destroyed. And this is no different. Like the level of destruction in the final action scenes is off the scale.
I saw a social media clip yesterday, and people were talking about, they were trying to calculate the number of casualties that would have happened in that final scene. And again, the like I said, the Snyderverse people online, there were arguments happening in the comments like, oh, they'd evacuated the city and all this, and like
it couldn't happen that fast.
Yeah, I think we're giving a little too much credit to Snyder here. I think that that's where the movie loses me, is the final battle, because it just becomes this giant CGI schmaz fest thing. And like, it's weird because the part when the most quote unquote action's happening is when my eyes kind of glaze over and I get bored with it. Yeah, because it's all of the character build up that I'm actually interested in, and then once they just get to the big fight scene, I'm like, I've seen this. I've like, do I need to watch it again? So yeah, it's really the last like 30 or 40 minutes where Zack Snyder's instincts get the best of him, I think, because he likes to do the big blow up boom stuff, and it just doesn't really land for me in this movie.
Yeah, I think some of it works for me, and some of it goes too far and a bit too self-indulgent. Like the nano alien tentacle thing, that was too much. Didn't really know what the hell was going on with that, to be honest. But when Superman destroys that, it was quite an emotional moment and done in an emotional fashion, and where kind of the music really comes through in that moment. Hans Zimmer's score is great there. And then we have like the destruction of the other ship in Metropolis that gets sucked into the Phantom Zone. That's all spectacular to look at, and there's enough variation, I think, with the visuals to keep it somewhat interesting. But when Superman and Zod fight, it does push the boundaries a bit with the level of destruction for me. Like you can't help but think, as we've said, like how many people are getting killed right now with both guys just being hurled into the buildings. However, like Zack Snyder does change perspective sometimes when Zod begins to fly, and the camera goes tighter to Superman flying around, and the background is just moving very quickly, while Superman is very clear. So I kind of like those little scenes. I wish we kind of had more of that, just for more balance in that fight in particular. So, I did enjoy the little fight on the kind of the satellite in space as well. That was pretty cool. Probably a highlight in that scene at the end. But yeah, I agree to the most part that I think it just gets a bit too much. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a fault of Snyder for doing this, because it happens with all big blockbuster, big budget studio movies. But the amount of overt product placement in this movie was jarring to me, specifically 7-Eleven, IHOP, and Sears, which are like staple American properties. And I'm like, we're fighting in an IHOP restaurant, and they're very intentionally showing us this is an IHOP restaurant. And like I said, the big Sears logo, which is like a department store here in America, and I was just like, I was getting Wayne's World flashbacks to when he's holding up like the Coke and the Doritos, and I'm like, we're working real hard to push these companies into this movie for no reason, and like just little things like that. I'm like, I can't do it.
It's always so infuriating when that happens. I remember there's some really terrible ones in some of the Daniel Craig Bond films, with the Heineken stuff and like the watch shots. Yeah. It's always terrible when that happens.
Yeah, I mean,
you completely out.
There's got to be a way to do it subtly, but sometimes when a movie just like hits you over the head with a product placement, it's like, it just completely takes me out of the movie. And when I watch this movie 4 times in a week, I'm like, I don't need to think about an IHOP pancake again.
At least you get ideas of what to have for dessert.
I need to check all my appliances for Sears.
Favorite scene for you from a directional point of view, Andrew?
There's a shot that's really cool that I like, and it's towards the end of the film where Superman has been captured by Zod, and it's not like explicitly explained, but he sort of goes into this like dreamlike state where he has a conversation. Superman and Zod have a conversation, and they're sort of on a farm, and the entire ground underneath Superman is a pile of skulls. And he gets pulled into the skulls, and like the what's happening around plot wise is not that consequential, quite frankly. But I do like sort of the visual element of him like going underneath this pile of dead bodies. And it's just an interesting image, and it's a cool image, and it sort of again embodies Snyder, where he's a really good image maker.
Yeah.
What he's putting in terms of like what's happening around story wise isn't that consequential, but at least he makes cool looking stuff. And I thought that was a cool visual.
Yeah, it's certainly a great visual, but as you say, it doesn't really go anywhere. And I would have loved to have seen more of that, really. But then you might be pushing the rating a little bit. I don't know, but it just feels a bit out of place. I'll certainly talk about that a bit more in screenplay. But for me, one action scene I did really like, and I think works well, is the action between like Superman, Feora, and another big dude, Kryptonian, and the military. I thought was fantastic for me. Certainly with this more realistic angle, where we're very much seeing this action through human eyes, where you can barely see the blows they commit against each other, and the explosions feel more prominent than anything. It's not going like ridiculously fast, like you feel like you're missing what's happening. It's just very like stop-start with the impacts, but very fast. But you're never like needing to feel like you need to rewind to wonder whether you've missed something. So I think the balance in speed is spot on for me from a human perspective watching it. So I think my favorite part of that was where like Superman punches like the big dude into a load of trains, and then moments later you just see like a massive train like falling out of the sky at Superman. That was cool for me. So does that kind of style of action in this scene in particular, did that not work as well for you? Or...
there's all the fighting stuff in this movie doesn't really connect with me in any sort of way.
Okay.
Like I'll watch it, but I'm just kind of like disconnected to it. Again, I think that all the stuff that's happening with Clark and Jonathan, and I'll get much more into that in the screenplay part of it. I think there's a lot of stuff about the character building that's really interesting to me. And once we get to just the punch, knock over buildings and all that stuff, it's really just because I clocked it. The fight scene starts at 1 hour and 29 minutes, and it runs until the 2 hour and 7 minute mark when Zod is eventually vanquished.
Yeah.
So we've got like 38 straight minutes of fighting, and I'm like, stop, please. Like, can we get can I get 15 minutes of this? Like, I don't need 38 minutes of it. And so I think I'm just so bombarded with it that I just kind of get fatigued, and I'm like, I just zone out.
Yeah, maybe there's too much, but I think I understand what kind of they were going for with certainly the realism, trying to just figure out what would this actually look like. So I certainly appreciate that. And yeah, it's definitely pushing the boundaries of like, is this actually watchable? But I think it doesn't go beyond that boundary for me. So I appreciate that kind of that angle that they're going for. Like with a lot of other like superhero, not just Superman, but a lot of other superhero films, you feel like there's no clear difference on how a lot of these action scenes are playing out, regardless of superpowers. Whereas this, I feel like they are trying to actively try and do something a bit different. And obviously it won't work for everyone, but I appreciate that they're trying to do something different.
It's a fundamental problem for me with just superhero movies in general, which I am a huge fan of superhero films. I've literally got Batman and Superman on my wall behind me. A lot of times, though, the climactic fight in most superhero movies is the part that I'm the least interested in. I'm much more interested in the exploration of the characters and how they're adapting to their environment. And so when we get to the big thing, you usually almost always know how it's going to play out. And so the variation is so minute for how you can change things that like I feel like I've seen just about every form of what there is out there. And so it can just be tiresome at a certain point. And that's kind of how this movie feels for me, is 38 minutes is really pushing it for a fight scene.
Yeah. Directing score, Andrew, what are you going for Man of Steel?
In spite of a 38-minute fight scene that I've just said I don't care for, I also got to give Zack Snyder credit. Yeah. I watched this movie very closely, and I did not catch a single second of slow motion. I might have missed it, but
wow,
the dude right. He is notorious for slow motion. I mean, I'm convinced Rebel Moon could be 50% shorter if he cut out the slow motion.
Yeah,
this movie has none of it. Like. So even though his instincts can sometimes get in his way, I don't think they get in his way in this movie so much. And I think that middle hour and 10 minutes is such a fascinating take on Superman and Clark and familiarizing himself with the world and adapting to it. I'm actually going to give this a really high score. I think this is the best movie Snyder's ever done in terms of like his directorial acumen. I'm going to give him an 8.2. I actually think I think this movie comes off a lot better than a lot of people want to give it credit for, especially because also the build and then the way that Zod arrives is so impressive, and that stands out from everything else I've ever seen in a superhero movie. When Zod shows up, that is a different type of scene than exists out there in this genre.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a proper like alien invasion movie at that point. I don't think that's difficult to argue against, really, when you put it up against other like alien invasion films. Yeah, for me, directional score for Man of Steel is a difficult one. Yeah, I really appreciate and enjoyed the naturalistic look this film is going for, and I really enjoyed a lot of the design elements here in the beginning, even though maybe it felt a little bit rushed with the opening, just so much going on. Yeah, the fact that you mentioned there's no slow-mo in here and it's a Zack Snyder film is kind of blown my mind a little bit. I just never noticed that before.
I was watching, that was literally all I watched for on the fourth watch.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just love this commitment that I've said many times already, is that just always trying to direct this film through a lens of what if Superman was real in our world. And I really appreciate that commitment, even though sometimes it goes too far, and like the whole tentacle fight scene was weird. Yeah, so I'll go like an 8.3 for me. Not my favorite Zack Snyder film. For me, I think my favorite would either be 300 or Watchmen. Yeah, maybe this would be the third best. I don't know. Certainly not Army of the Dead.
Certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, that's just Zack Snyder indulgence.
I do like his Dawn of the Dead take, though, even though it felt kind of blasphemous to say, like, why are we doing another George Romero? I think his Dawn of the Dead's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Screenplay, then, for Man of Steel. So the film definitely feels like a stripped-down Superman film in some ways. Like, you don't have Lex Luthor, there's no kryptonite, Clark Kent is not a reporter at the Daily Planet. Like, similar to what they did with James Bond at the time in Casino Royale. Like, there's no gadgets, no Moneypenny, no Q. Like, the focus in both films is just getting to the heart of how these characters tick. Like, in Man of Steel, it feels like the film is showing who this Superman is going to be in this world. And I think the love for Lois Lane is still the same, but he's still very wary of how the wider world will see him as Superman as the film progresses. Like, even by the end, that question is still remains, like, which I think continues this sort of realism angle you have in the directing.
The thing I love most about this particular screenplay is, again, this is where I really want to talk about the relationship between Jonathan and Clark.
Right.
I think is so interesting, and every scene between the two of them is integral, whether it's Clark when he's younger or he's a teenager. There's that huge emotional moment where there's like a tornado in the vicinity and they all get under the bridge and Jonathan goes back to save the dog and sacrifices himself. Rightly, I think that Cavill and Costner convey the necessary emotion to get across, and I love everything that happens. I wish I got like a 2-hour movie of just Superman growing up with Martha and Jonathan. Like, I would have been fascinated to just see the evolution of that character and all the wisdom that Jonathan imposed on him growing up, because I think there's a lot to mine with this version. And I also think it's unfortunate Zack Snyder kind of got shortchanged by them shoehorning in a BVS Batman vs Superman movie. Yeah. Like, right in the wake of this. Like, Cavill deserved more than one standalone Superman movie. Like, there's so much more you could explore with the character that I would have loved to have seen, because I think that this movie, like I said, I think this movie gets a lot right. And I do think some of the dialogue is actually pretty good in the movie. There's problems, but I do think there's enough there with the flashbacks that I can buy into it, and all the stuff that's happening with the bus and the way he's interacting with his other peers, his kids, his other friends, classmates. I think there's a lot of interesting complexity to this movie that, again, I just feel like people sort of gloss over. All they think about is the final battle and let that sort of be the determination for what this movie is. And I think there's a lot more to it in the front.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think, there was a lot of talk about a Man of Steel 2, whether that was going to happen even after the Justice League film. What was going to happen with Henry Cavill. And, at one point, was he going to be in a Black Adam 2 nonsense? Another, talk about bad films. My God, Black Adam. What was that about?
The less said about Black Adam, the better.
Yeah. But I think also the fact that we didn't get another movie, like a standalone film, I feel like Warner Brothers and DC at the time, they were very much trying to compete with Marvel. Like, they already had an Avengers film out. They were like, we need to move the pieces quicker with our own universe. So I think, unfortunately, because of kind of the competitive nature of how Hollywood operates, a Man of Steel 2 just never came to be, unfortunately. And I would love to have seen more, like a film with more flashbacks with Kevin Costner and Diane Lane to fully explore this character. As you say, I think there's just so much more to mine of how Clark sees himself in this world as he was growing up.
Yeah, and one of the areas where I wish the screenplay would have had the time to breathe a little bit more is, again, we talked about it on the flip side to this. I think the fundamental thing for me when I'm watching a Superman movie is what's the dynamic between Clark and Lois. And this movie, there's so much more that happens before they finally connect that you don't really, I don't get the sense that there's as much chemistry there because they don't really have the time to sort of put in. Amy Adams is an all-time great actress, so like you would assume there'd be more there to give her, and it just doesn't. It feels like they were prepared for Man of Steel 2 to really explore that relationship, and we never really get to, you know, the world between those two, and that's unfortunate. I wish the screenplay had devoted a little more time to that than 38 minutes of breaking buildings.
Yeah, because I definitely feel like Amy Adams is very shortchanged in this film. I definitely wanted more of her, and she spends half the film just trying to look for Superman. Like, where is he?
Or that she's stuck in that crazy scene where she's got to shoot her way off the ship with the help of Jor-El's consciousness, and I'm like, are we really doing this? Can we do something better?
That was a fun scene for me, but yeah, you're right though. Like, we definitely needed more scenes between Superman and Lois for sure. So the opening scenes on Krypton, like, the only real new information that we don't get from like older films is that we get in this film is that there's this codex and that Superman is the first like natural birth in centuries. Then later we get more details about like the Kryptonians' history, that they overstretch themselves with Krypton's natural resources and with population control and designing who people should be before it got out of control. And it's very much playing against these thematic like Western values of freedom that we know, which in turn leads into kind of Superman's own theme of hope, that maybe Superman can be like a different kind of Kryptonian with his time on Earth. So I thought like the juxtaposition of the world's values work really well here, especially to kind of like build up the stakes of the film too. So I kind of really enjoyed sort of seeing the differences between like Zod's Kryptonian values and Earth's values, and where like Jor-El, Russell Crowe's character, kind of sees both sides and it's like, maybe we need to rethink how our own values are being, how we live our life socially as a Kryptonian. Maybe we need to borrow values from Earth. So I found that kind of fascinating, and it would have been nice to delve even deeper into a next film, maybe.
Yeah, because I wrote down a note that like this movie wants to explore the sort of this idea of science versus military and sort of these two juxtaposed value systems and how you get to an end goal with a society and a civilization. And I wish that it had explored it more. And I find the codex in and of itself kind of a dumb concept. It's sort of like this Deus Ex Machina. It sort of reminded me of the Mission Impossible movie where they're dealing with the entity or whatever the hell it was called. And I'm like, it took multiple watches where I'm like, what is the point of this codex and where does it connect? I couldn't keep track of it because it just feels like it was kind of slammed into a couple of spots. Like the idea of what's in it is interesting, but just the whole idea that it's this like actual tangible item, I thought was kind of a stupid thing to tie the movie together. And I was like, couldn't we come up with something better than a codex, really? Like, that's the best you got.
And they kind of like change tact and like, oh, actually it's within Superman himself. So it gives Zod more of an excuse to kill him. But I'm like, wouldn't he have tried to do that anyway?
Yes.
But I get like where they're coming from with it sets up, it gives you know, the Kryptonians more of a value system, more of a cultural thing with how they see themselves, how Zod sees how Krypton should be, like very regimented, very military, like everyone has their own assigned purpose for being alive, whereas we don't have that whatsoever. Yeah, so I found that really interesting. But what I also kind of liked is how the film sets up these kind of moral dilemmas as well. Very early on in the film with Clark, like the film shows us these kind of flashbacks reflecting like the emotional situations that he's going through. Like when he saves those kids on the bus, should he have let them die to keep it secret? Otherwise, the world will change quickly. Then later, like Zod is trying to intimidate Superman, and then we get like a flashback of these bullies threatening to beat Clark up as a teenager, but Clark doesn't resist. So I think it's interesting that the film kind of focuses on when the questions of when is the right time to be Superman and what type of person he wants to be as Superman with all this power and strength. As of course the film also makes a point that the world might be very afraid of Superman moving forward. So I like how there's never like a clear answer for Superman at any point. And I think that's completely underpinned with Superman snapping Zod's neck at the end. After he does that, he cries out in anguish, completely regretting what he's just done. So rightly or wrongly, I think it's just really interesting the fact that he's still in like a quandary, a moral quandary of like, who is he supposed to be as Superman when he kills Zod? Because it's interesting that Christopher Nolan was a writer or an advisor on this film, and it was publicly revealed that he said to the directors and other people that Superman should not kill Zod, and they ignored that advice. So I think even now, I think it is still controversial, but watching it again, I feel like it works a little bit better. Because I mean, there could have been a version of the film where Zod gets put back into the Phantom Zone in that earlier scene where the ship gets taken into the Phantom Zone. That could have happened. They could have put somehow, I don't know, Superman could have just chucked him in there or something. I don't know. But how do you feel about like how the film portrays these moral quandaries for Superman, and should he have killed Zod at the end?
Yeah, so I think that it feels like it always comes up with Batman and Superman, and like, should either of them ever kill characters on screen? Kind of what I like about, I've always gravitated more towards DC Comics versus Marvel Comics. I think obviously Marvel's been much more successful as a film franchise, but what I always liked about the DC Comics was there's much more mature thematic elements to them, and I personally like the choice that Snyder makes with Clark Superman having to kill Zod. Like, you sort of get a scene earlier in the movie where he's kind of like back to Superman 2. He's at a diner, he's at like a bar, and gets in a guy, kind of gets in his face, and instead of hurting him, he like picks his like giant truck up and like throws it, off in the distance. And it's like he's starting to kind of be pushed, but he knows his boundaries. He doesn't want to go too far with what he can do. And I kind of like that he does get pushed too far. And because I do think Snyder was going to go with the direction that he's kind of started to go with Justice League and things like that, where, like, how would the world react to somebody this strong that could kill anyone with the, snap of a finger? I do think there's a lot to explore, and the comic versions of Superman have definitely explored what Superman can do on the darker side of things. And so I actually think it is a smart choice if we had gotten more Superman movies, because it's kind of contained to this one Man of Steel film. We don't really know what direction they would have gone ultimately, but I actually I think it's a smart choice to give us something a little controversial to sink our teeth into and actually talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so for me, it definitely works better, the fact that he does kill Zod, because he's very much put in a position that, I mean, it's very difficult for him to have another option. Like, it's kill him or all these innocent people die. So, yeah, it's really interesting that they went down that road. What's also kind of interesting is, like, we've talked about Zod's, like, entrance coming back down to Earth, but I kind of didn't really like the fact that he just turns up. Because I was just like, hang on, wasn't he just encrusted in this crystal-like goo before? How the hell did he get out of this? But then you have, this creepy telebox broadcast, That was good, though. You're definitely like drifting into like a horror tone, but of course you don't have to wait too long for an info dump exposition scene to explain how Zod reached Earth. So maybe that could have been done a little bit differently for me, and what his plans are with all that, which is basically to turn Earth into Krypton. But it's done while like Superman has seemingly lost consciousness while he's trying to adapt to like a new atmosphere on Zod's ship, which I quite enjoyed, kind of the science around that. So it feels like more of a dream sequence, or Zod has somehow got into Superman's head. I think it's revealed that he does somehow get into his head, even though you don't really know how. But what's also interesting is that it's very visual as well with Zod's voiceover, which I kind of appreciated. You get more design elements put in there. But when Superman asks, like, what will happen to Earth, you see all these human skulls, as you talked about, Andrew, on the ground, and Superman kind of drowns in them. So that was, very horror-inspired for sure. Definitely very different to what we've seen previously in the film. I liked it being a horror fan, but it seems a little jarring and out of place at the same time. So for me, I would have loved to have seen sort of maybe more of that. I know that would never really happen, but it's just a very kind of out of place choice.
Yeah, it kind of seems like,
especially for like an exposition dump, essentially.
Like, I'm thinking about like Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which at its core is fundamentally a horror film start to finish. Like, it's very much a Sam Raimi movie. And so like when some stuff horrific happens in that movie, it never feels out of place because he set the tone early. With this movie, it feels like there's a couple points where all of a sudden you get dropped into a horror film and then you get plucked right back out. And so there is a disconnect there for sure. The exposition dumps bother me in this movie a lot. There's two key ones. One, when Jor-El is talking to Superman and kind of explaining everything to him. And then the second one, when Zod is explaining everything and how they got out of exile and all that. Yeah. And they're just very egregious. It's very obvious that like Snyder just doesn't have a lot of nuance when it comes to his writing. Yeah. And he's just like, let's just drop a couple of these huge moments and give these actors some big monologues and we'll drop it in there. And that's where the screenplay kind of comes undone.
Yeah, I don't see a reason why they couldn't just tell the story a bit more linearly with just showing us how Zod gets out of that situation in the Phantom Zone and telling us more about the culture of Krypton at the start of the film, rather than seeing Russell Crowe fly on a dragonfly and have a swim for a while. Why can't we have all that at the start? So, but there we are. Funny lines, interesting lines. I think certainly one from the trailer that I always enjoyed from Michael Shannon when he's about to go, get all crusted up in stone or whatever, and he's like, "I will find him." Really great from Michael Shannon as he kind of just repeats that line. That was kind of funny. But yeah, great passion from him. There's a few good ones from Amy Adams, like when he's meeting those generals in the Arctic, and she says, "So if we're done measuring dicks, can we have your people show me what you found?" Was a good one. Have you got anything interesting?
Yeah, so I think probably the only moment that's like kind of funny, again, this movie does not have a lot of humor to it. You pointed out one small little line. The one that's kind of amusing is when Superman goes to take off into flight to have his big fight, and he's standing next to Lois, and he tells her, "You might want to take a step back a little bit." And she steps back, and he's like, "Maybe a little bit more." And there's like, it's that moment where you're like, okay, if we get a Man of Steel 2, these two are going to have some really good scenes together because it's there. The magic's there. We just don't get to see the magic, and that moment happens. And then in terms of like a moment that kind of chokes me up, and it doesn't, again, this is a superhero movie, but there's some good writing in there. It's when Clark's 13 and he's just sort of struggling with everything. And he says, "Can't I just keep pretending to be your son?" to Jonathan Kent. And they sort of have this emotional moment. And he says, "You are my son, but somewhere out there you have another father too, who gave you another name. And he sent you here for a reason, Clark. And even if it takes you the rest of your life, you owe it to yourself to find out what the reason is." And it's in those moments where I'm like, okay, this movie's really great. even for like all of its flaws, there's some real greatness baked into this movie with the complexity of Superman. And in terms of like a famous line, obviously it's the scene where they're in an interrogation room and Superman's shackled, even though he can break out anytime he wants, as he does. And Lois asks him what the S is for, and they talk about it. And he says, "On my world, it means and he says, "On my world, it means hope." And she's like, "Well, here it just means it's an S."
Yeah. How about Super? Yeah, not allowed to say Superman in this film, apart from one guy does, and then all bets are off. Everyone's saying Superman. I just feel like maybe like in that moment when Superman is fully established, then everyone's like, okay, we can call him Superman now. He's earned the right to be called it, sort of thing. I think when I heard this for the second time, like when you have all this destruction and Superman comes to meet Amy Adams again, I'm not sure how well this line comes off. It just feels a bit too corny for me when they're kissing and Amy Adams says, you know, they say it's all downhill after the first kiss. And then Cavill says, I'm pretty sure that only counts when you're kissing a human. I'm like, I think that's just too corny.
That's kind of on the nose rough, yeah.
Yeah. Especially with the tone of the film. That's just like, where has this come from? What? I know you're trying to find out where I hang my cape. You won't. There's a good one from Henry Cavill at the end. And then literally soon after, the general says to the captain, what are you smiling about, Captain? Nothing, sir. I just think he's kind of hot. Again, where has this come from?
That's the most out of place line in the whole movie.
I'm like, okay. Fair enough. But I think my favorite line is from Russell Crowe, and I think Amy Adams is on the ship, and Crowe is basically, you know, a ghost or however you want to call him, trying to get Amy Adams out of the ship and the escape pod. And when she's in the pod, he says, "Remember, the phantom drives are essential in stopping them. Move your head to the left." And you're like, what? And then a Kryptonian comes in. That was great for me. Right, screenplay score. Andrew, what are you going for?
Whew, man, this is tricky, Martin. As much as I like the dialogue with all the stuff with Jonathan and Martha and all the flashback stuff, which I think works really well, the exposition dumps are brutal. I think that there's a lot of heavy-handedness in the screenplay. So I got to ding this one quite a bit in comparison to the other parts of the movie. I'm going to give it a 7.3. I don't think it's a bad screenplay, but I do think it's very clunky for me comparatively, and so I had to kind of take it down compared to where I was with the direction. I think this is where Snyder sort of gets himself in some trouble.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of that to a certain extent. I think certainly the moral dilemmas and Superman kind of discovering himself, I think kind of works really well. I agree, like there's definitely some tonal shifts that are kind of great in a different film. Don't necessarily work here with General Zod. And yeah, the exposition dumps definitely could have just been done linearly, just acted out in just normal scenes. So I don't know whether Zack Snyder was just thinking the film is just becoming too long anyway, or I think really it's just showing up his poor writing in efficient storytelling, probably. Yeah, and again, as we just mentioned, there's just some weird lines that kind of, it's just like, where has this come from? So yeah, it's certainly very much a mixed bag, but again, I appreciate kind of the realism aspect of this and this whole thing of just trying to build more of a world of what Krypton was and how Earth it will perceive Superman. Even though you don't really get too deep into it, I kind of enjoyed where the film left us at the end, especially after Superman does kill Zod. And it's just a very different feeling and approach for Superman at the end of this film. The fact that he has killed someone, which, you know, in other Superman films, you're like, what the hell? Superman doesn't kill people. He is a hero. But I'm like, well, our world right now and at the time when they made this, it's complicated. And I think that the film certainly reflects that. So I'll be a little bit more generous. I think I'll still stay in the 7s and go with a 7.6 for me. Acting then, Henry Cavill, I think, is fantastic in this film. Obviously very different to Christopher Reeve. It's a very different portrayal, certainly a more of an emotional portrayal and performance. But I just really liked a lot of the little moments, especially the little moment where he's basically helpless and watches Kevin Costner, his dad, die being swept up by a hurricane or a tornado. So you realize this is going to be a very different Clark Kent / Superman portrayal, like a more an emotional performance is going to come, which I think makes sense for this tone. As Clark is always battling this moral dilemma of whether to save people or not to protect himself. That's kind of got to always eat away at you, that dilemma in his head growing up. He must have that like all the time, like going to school, because he could easily hurt a lot of people if he wanted to. But then then he's in a huge world of trouble if that happens. Certainly for the people that he loves, not necessarily him. Watching your dad die when he was Clark's, biggest believer in that, that's got to hurt. And I think Cavill does a fantastic job in that moment.
Yeah, as much as I would like to give my favorite performance to Kevin Costner, who is lights out great in this movie, he's like he doesn't have enough scenes to like warrant superseding what Cavill does. I'm a huge Henry Cavill fan. I think he's very underrated as an actor. I don't think people have really given him credit for what he can do as an actor, and maybe it's just because he's so big. Like sometimes if you're that size, people don't really give you credit for your acting skills, and I think he's got a lot underneath there. What also really stood out to me watching these movies back to back, the Donner Cut and then this one, I couldn't believe how similar Henry Cavill looked at times to Christopher Reeve in Superman 2. There were a couple of moments where I was like, wow, I never thought Cavill looked like Christopher Reeve. And then I saw them sort of side by side quite frequently. And I was like, wow, there are actually a lot of physical similarities in their face structure.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, Cavill was a really, really good choice to play this role. He's obviously perfectly suited for what Snyder was going with tonally, visually speaking. I think he conveys the emotion in the two key points. The scene where Jonathan sacrifices himself, it's all on Cavill's face, and then the scene at the end, right after he has to do what he has to do with Zod, he screams out, like you said. The emotion is conveyed. I think he's a very believable Superman, and we obviously don't get to see much of him as Clark Kent because a lot of the flashbacks are of a younger actor playing, and so we only get the tiny little snippet at the end of the movie, and it's kind of a what if. Like I have to kind of project in my head what I think Cavill would have done with a Clark Kent. I'd be fascinated to see, but I think he's a really, really good choice.
Yeah. Henry Cavill's just a very charming and charismatic actor. He's got some really great like comedy chops as well, certainly beyond this film in his career. And you don't get a lot of that here, which I think this role certainly challenged him a lot. And I think he, on the whole, very much succeeds. And you get a snippet of that charm when he dons the glasses, at the end with him showing up in the Daily Planet. They have a conscious effort in the script that, okay, we're not going to deal with the fact that he's changing his hair and he's got like glasses on to hide his identity. We're not going down that road, which I guess is very much understandable. And one thing we haven't mentioned is the red trunks. There's no red trunks here, even though I think it maybe shows up his bits even more. But
it sure does.
Yeah, but it's interesting that, James Gunn has recently said that he did phone Zack Snyder and was like, how did you come to the decision to not, use the trunks? And apparently Zack Snyder was like, we tried every which way, front and back, to try and make the trunks work, but they ended up obviously not using it. I think on the whole, like, you kind of forget that the red trunks aren't there in the film, and you get to focus on Henry Cavill's performance. I think he's really good.
Yeah, I've never been one that's tied up in the trunk debate. Like it doesn't bother me when David Corenswet, I think looks perfectly fine, and I like the look of the suit, but it doesn't bother me that Cavill's Superman doesn't have it, because it's sort of the aesthetic of that. Like, they set the tone very early in that movie that they're all sort of wearing that kind of style of suit, and so it makes sense that the trunks aren't part of it. So it's never really bothered me. I also really quickly will mention another reason why I'd be fascinated to see Cavill play Clark more is, for people who know anything about Henry Cavill in his personal life, he is a giant dork. I mean,
oh yeah,
and I say that lovingly because I'm a giant dork. Like, he loves video games. He loves painting Warhammer figurines. So I feel like he could pull off the nerdy Clark Kent from like a personality standpoint, because he very much is a nerd at heart. He just happens to be in this giant frame of a body.
Yeah, I mean, he did that Instagram video of just building a computer himself.
Yes.
He's currently trying to figure out how to make a Warhammer 20,000 movie or something.
Right.
He's got like the Highlander film coming as well. So yeah, he's a massive nerd. And
and like he was notorious on the Witcher set for going up to the screenwriters and saying like, this wouldn't have happened, or this should have happened. And it's like, he knows the source material. He's very much ingrained in the nerd culture, which makes him all the more endearing to me.
Yeah, it's such a shame, because we should have got another season of The Witcher with Henry Cavill, because he was expecting to be Superman again before James Gunn took over. So they definitely shafted him there, unfortunately.
And the audience
had a good film.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't have been a good film, because he would have been up against Black Adam. So maybe that was a blessing in disguise.
Yes.
But yeah, as we said, like, Amy Adams is a great actor, and I think she's very much underused here. She has more scenes with like Lawrence Fishburne than Henry Cavill, it feels like, and I think that's a bit of a shame, because her talents are endless, and I feel like less just trying to figure out where Superman is and just have more scenes with him. And maybe it would have been good to just have Lois Lane work with Clark Kent and have Clark Kent as a reporter earlier, like, rather than just like a tag at the end, to see how, even just like a scene here and there, just to give us a sense of how that dynamic would have worked a bit more between Lois Lane and Clark Kent, not necessarily Lois and Superman.
It's funny we got this far into this and just now talked about Lawrence Fishburne. I mean, there's a lot of really great actors in this that are just kind of put to the side. Even, quite frankly, I am a massive fan of Michael Shannon.
Yeah.
I don't think he gets to do enough as Zod. Like, there's not enough range for, like, he could have explored that character substantially more. I think Terrence Stamp in the Donner cut that we talked about gives a more interesting Zod performance. Like, it feels like this one's a little too one note for me. And I was like, Michael Shannon can do significantly more with that character, which is unfortunate.
He's just angry all the time. It feels like I want to see what he does to relax and manage that anger. Surely there's got to be something there. Favorite performance for you?
It's definitely Cavill. As much as I want to give it to Kevin Costner, I mean, if you have the weight of Superman on your shoulders and you can carry the movie to any degree, you're probably going to get my favorite performance. I think every Superman that's ever put on the costume has been the best performer in their movie.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And I think if Kevin Costner was in it a little bit more, it might have been a bit more of a debate. But Henry Cavill for me, for sure. Acting score, though, what are you going for?
All right, I'm just going to give it a straight 8.0. I think it's for me, an 8 is a great score. I think it's a great acting ensemble. I wish there was a little more for Amy Adams to do. I wish Michael Shannon had a little more nuance. I wish maybe Lawrence Fishburne got another scene or two, but I can't knock it. All the acting is great there, and especially Diane Lane, especially Kevin Costner, especially Henry Cavill.
Yeah, I mean, that's really difficult to argue with a straight 8, because like all the performances here are, they're all really good. No one's bad or anything, and you always kind of wanting more from a lot of these incredible actors. So, and obviously Henry Cavill at the moment, definitely the second best Superman we've had. So yeah, I think I'll go like an 8.2 just for Cavill. Right, let's add up the scores then for The Man of Steel.
This one's going to be close, I think.
Man of Steel gets 47.6. Oof. So Man of Steel wins.
I had a good run. I was 2-0. It all comes to an end.
Yeah, very, very tight. Whereas Superman 2, the Donner cut, got 46 points exactly. So very close. So I think we're safe from the Zack Snyder fans for this episode, at least.
and I think I have no problem with. I think Man of Steel is fundamentally a better movie than the Donner cut. Like, I don't think there's a whole lot of question there.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff from both films, and a lot of questionable stuff in both films, I think it's fair to say. Next episode, we are returning to our Legends episode, where we'll be talking about one of film history's phenomenal actors that we have spoken about already on this podcast, and that is Gene Hackman. So we'll be having a look at his work. And joining me in the early hours for them, Movies and Us are returning again. That was a lot of fun. They were on the Vampires 2 episode earlier this year, so do check that one out as well, where I absolutely shat on The Lost Boys because it is terrible.
You sure did.
And yeah. Andrew, you have been amazing as always. It's always an absolute pleasure you coming on the show. Tell us about your podcast and where can we find you, and any other episodes that are coming up on your show.
Sure, the pleasure's all mine, Martin. Third time was definitely the charm. I always have a good time here. If you ever want me back, let me know. The show's the Revisionist Almanac. Talk about past Oscar ceremonies. I'm very active on all the socials. Come find me. If there's a social media app, I have it. It's Rev Almanac is the handle. The big thing I've got right now, I just dropped it today as the time of recording. I'm doing a giant summer collaboration project on Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I think is one of the great movies of all time. And so I've got like 25 different people who have come on, and we're talking about the movie, favorite Spielberg movies, favorite Indiana Jones moments, all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to be dropping one episode a month for 3 months. So come over to the page, check it out. If you're into Indiana Jones and you don't care about the Oscars, there's a lot of stuff for you.
Yeah, big Indiana Jones fan. I think my favorite, though, is still The Last Crusade. Sean Connery in that is genius.
Definitely the one I've watched the most. I love Last Crusade.
Yeah, I think they're trying to kill us. I know, Dad. Happens to me all the time. Right, it's time to say goodbye, people. It is goodbye from Andrew. Bye-bye.
Adios.
And it's goodbye from me. I might, have a go at wearing my red trunks and see how it fits. Yeah. Could be the next Superman after Mr. Cornswear. Who knows? Might just need to work out a bit. Bye-bye. That's it for part 2. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.